And it is Isaiah. This is the OMB podcast, instant reaction to the trade of Claude Giroux to the Florida Panthers, as expected. And we'll get into why it was the Panthers and why the return was what it was for the Flyers. Just to recap, the Flyers received Owen Tippett, a 2023 third-round draft pick, a 2024 first-round draft pick, and the Florida Panthers get Claude Giroux, Connor Bunnaman, German Rubtsov, and a 2024 fifth-round pick. Okay, a couple things. Let's go through the low-hanging fruit. Bunnaman and Rubtsov, the Flyers are ridding themselves of these contracts for players that either have limited or no NHL potential in their eyes, probably making room for Bobby Brink, Noah Cates, Ronnie Attard, and other players, young players coming along in the future, because they only have 50 contract slots, and this clears two of them among the young players. Owen Tippett, while playing in the AHL, has had enough NHL time that he'll probably report right to the Flyers. Now, let's talk about Giroux, Chuck Fletcher. What happened here? It's simple. Claude Giroux did not want to go anywhere else. And that was not a very well-kept secret. The idea that they were out there with Colorado, Giroux had a preference for Florida. No, it was none of that. The sources are crystal clear that he was only willing to waive his no-move clause, which had been given to him by Ron Hextall, and possibly Flyers would have had to pay more AAV if that no-move were not part of the deal at that time. But they had no leverage. Chuck Fletcher simply had no leverage. So to be able to get a guy like Tippett who could turn around and be an NHL player, I'll get into him a little bit, and get a first-round pick in 24 and a third-round pick and clear some contract slots, it's not the worst deal. It's certainly, for the premier player available at the trade deadline, it's underwhelming. The Flyers, in an underwhelming season, with their biggest trade, were not able to get more of a haul. There was conversations about Grigory Denisenko, a very dynamic player who would have brought many elements we were expecting from Morgan Frost. Maxi Samoskevich, I believe his name was, another dynamic, exciting. Nah. Owen Tippett is a lot like Wade Allison. He's a big, strapping kid. He's not as frenetic as Wade, so he's not going to catch your eyes as much. He's more of a lumbering guy. He's not a bad skater. For a big guy, he doesn't win as many battles as you would think he would. He has a fantastic shot, a lot like Wade Allison. They're very comparable players. But I think Owen Tippett has had almost 100 NHL games and really has failed to impress so far. We'll get some numbers on Owen Tippett directly. This is really what's going on here. The Flyers, virtually no leverage, and this is what happens when those circumstances present themselves. All the more reason for the Flyers to stop kidding themselves and talking about just a few moves away, a quick turnaround. BS. Okay. They didn't even score on their best chance to get big assets for their best player this year. Rental or not, we saw what happened in other circumstances with Ben Sherratt and Hampus Lindholm. Of course, there's a contract that was tied up, but still, that was quite a return that the Bruins had to give for Hampus Lindholm, who was a first-pairing defenseman and one of my favorite players. And he signs what's probably going to be in the neighborhood of an 8-year deal for $6.5 million. And look, I only mention that because it just gives you an idea of why Flyers fans are so upset after the emotional night of Claude's 1,000th game and all the pomp and circumstance and a ceremony that was pulled off just really perfectly. So, and here we are. It's rough. So let's take a look at the comparison. Now, the Bruins, as part of the deal, they knew they were going to sign him. The Bruins get Hampus Lindholm, Cody Curran, a defensive prospect. Anaheim gives up a first-round pick in 22, a second-round pick in 23, a second-round pick in 24, Urho Vakalainen, and John Moore. Now, I think there was some salary retention with John Moore by the Bruins and salary retention by the Ducks for Hampus Lindholm to make this whole thing go. And it's pretty obvious that even though Lindholm is a lot closer to the prime of his career, I think he's about 28. Can look that up, but it's disappointing. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It really is disappointing. So, look, we have to get over that and the reason why is real simple. The Flyers need to be honest with their fans. I find it hard to believe that they are deluding themselves and they're thinking that they're close to being able to be a playoff team. And that brings up some of the issues that we talked about. Is that what the Flyers are now, right? The Flyers are now the kind of team that is just trying to get into the playoffs, and we'll see what happens. That's never been the Flyers. And apparently that, according to Russ Cohen and reading some of the articles from Anthony Sanfilippo, that's about who they are. So let's think big picture here. Some people have speculated that part of this is a gentleman's agreement that if G is going to be this way about going to Florida, hey, that's okay because they'll get all of those assets, but G's coming back. And to this, I can't speak for Dan and Chef. I say no. I think that the Flyers very similar to what happened with Darryl Sittler in 84, 85. The Flyers had just retired Bill Barber, Bob Clark became the GM, and we're about to make Darryl Sittler the captain of an otherwise young squad that included Mark Howell. They brought in a guy named Dave Poulin, and they had an emerging Tim Kerr as a player and Pelle Lindbergh. So they had some pieces there, but they were still young and in their prime. And then, of course, they had the Tocchet's, the Zezel, Derek Smith. They get Murray Craven in this trade for Darryl Sittler right before the season begins. And I think part of that was really simple. Bob Clark decided that all the old guys were mostly gone. The only holdover from the 80 Stanley Cup final team was Ryan Propp. And I mean, he had come in right in his draft year of 79, 80. So he was in his prime. And as you know, he played into the 90s. So I think if the Flyers turn over a new leaf and are a little bit more honest with their fans and with themselves, if indeed they're still deluding themselves, I think it'll go over a lot better to see a young team with some newer pieces and some other changes that could happen in the offseason. It was mentioned today on Hockey Night in Canada. Jeff Marek and Elliot Friedman talked about possible moves with Sanheim, Provorov, Konechny. I think Konechny's getting moved. I think he's a player, regardless of whether they're rebuilding or not. I think Travis needs a change. I think because of the symbiosis between Ristolainen and Sanheim, they both seem to help each other in different ways. And the commitment that they made to Ristolainen, it doesn't make sense that if the Flyers are going to make significant changes on defense, that Travis would be the one who goes, even though his contract situation would indicate that he would be more of a prime candidate than Provorov. But if you think about it, if you're counting on Provorov, you're counting on Ryan Ellis. I think that's pretty crystal clear. And, the Flyers just can't go through that again, right? So that was my rationale, and I talked about it on the last show. I'll talk about it again when we have Kevin Durso on with the full crew, and he's going to go through, obviously, the entire trade deadline. So the way this lines up for me, I think the Flyers need a clean sweep of some of the older players. I think they were the fourth oldest team in the league. It's time for a change. So I think, like 84, 85, I don't think G should come back. I think they need to forge a new identity. I think we've had a decade of futility, and that needs to end. It's unfortunate for Chuck Fletcher that this 24 first-round pick he got, which seemed to be the turning point in being able to close this deal. He had to have a first-round pick if he wasn't going to get a better prospect. And as Brian Lutton talked about on the NHL Network, I think it's quite possible that is essentially just an asset, and he may never make that pick either because he's not here or he'll trade it in this or next offseason to get other assets. And a lot of it, again, depends on what their plan is. So Owen Tippett, to give you a breakdown, he is listed at 6'180" at that. I don't think that's right. I think he's actually bigger than that. Okay. I think he's like on his draft day. He was drafted in 2017, 10th overall by the Panthers. So Bill Zito was not the GM at that time, but I think the scouting staff is relatively intact because the Panthers have been a good drafting team. He's played 94 NHL games. He has 14 goals, 19 assists for 33 points. And as we talked about with Russ Cohen, for a bigger player, he doesn't seem to be winning the puck battles that you would think. And when we compared him to Allison, he doesn't have the fast twitch that Allison has. Of course, that gets him in some trouble. So, he's been able to stay on the ice, but he just really hasn't impressed so far. But being a big winger with a big shot, an NHL shot, sometimes it can take a little bit more time in his career, and we'll see how that works out. So coming up, if you look at the other players that might be on the move, you think about their unrestricted free agents like Derek Brassard, Justin Braun. Surely he'll be on the move. Possibly Martin Jones. Okay, so I think there could be a hockey trade in there, but those are the prime candidates to be moved in a season where the Flyers are tracking where they're at. This might be, relative to expectation, the worst season the Flyers have had since 2007. It's tough to see someone like Claude Giroux, who I warned repeatedly on this show, like Jerome McGinley. It seemed inevitable that they were going to have to trade him. They should have sat down with him a few years ago, maybe after last year, and took stock of what was going on. There were a lot of excuses last year, and it turned out that didn't really count for much. And that the call on them as a team that needed a rebuild was the correct one. The only other UFA I could see them moving would be Keith Yandel, and he probably, like G, probably doesn't want to go anywhere. And at the end of the day, I don't think Claude Giroux really wanted to go. With that, we are back for expert analysis from Kevin Durso, 97.3 ESPN this Monday. And as far as we know, Dan Silver and Chef will be with us. And it'll be well after the trade deadline at 3. If we're lucky, maybe we'll actually have a hockey trade. That would really be exciting. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you this Monday for a complete wrap-up of the entire trade deadline with highlights with the biggest deals, like a Lindholm deal, anything really large like that, Marc-Andre Fleury, if he moves on, and any other hockey trades that might happen. Nothing wrong with a general manager getting a jump with a team that's ready to make a deal right now. I think that would really help the Flyers this year, just like it did in 2007. If you want to get the fan base back and anticipating the offseason, make a good hockey trade now. It worked for Holmgren. It raised the spirits after that incredibly horrible 56-point season in 2007. And I think it would be a smart play by Chuck Fletcher if he could pull that off. At the end of the day, he certainly didn't do that with Claude Giroux. Take care, everybody. We'll see you Monday night.